What do you want me to do with this?
Wear it. Burn it. Whatever you want. You have Castle Black. My watch is ended.
One of the missed opportunities in the final seasons of Game of Thrones was the approach taken by Benioff and Weiss toward Jon Snow after his resurrection. We all know how that went on the show.
The Night King is coming. Daenerys is our queen. She is our queen. She'll be a good queen. You are my queen. I don't know what else I can say.
You can say nothing.
I always felt that the Jon Snow who was brought back to life by Melisandre should have had a much harder edge to him than what we were given. They briefly teased us with this possibility too when he executed the men of the Night's Watch, including Ollie, who was a boy.
You shouldn't be alive. It's not right.
Neither was killing me.
But then, once Sansa arrived at Castle Black, Jon reverted back to being the person he had been before his death. And we know, both from the books and the show, that being brought back by the Lord of Light has consequences. The most extreme example of this in A Song of Ice and Fire is Lady Stoneheart, the resurrected Catelyn Stark. So far in George's novels, she's been shown to be only vengeful and bloodthirsty, as she seeks retribution for her family. And while my focus here is the TV adaptation, it still needs to be mentioned since I used Lady Stoneheart as a comparison, that Catelyn was brought back by Beric 3 days after the Freys had thrown her in a river. So the point could be made that the time gap between her death and resurrection could have had some impact on the severity that we see in her. On the show, though, they did touch upon the impact of being brought back.
It's not getting any easier, you know.
I know. Every time I come back, I'm a bit less. Pieces of you get chipped away.
For continuity purposes and better storytelling, Jon should have been at least subtly different. He was betrayed by his men and brutally stabbed to death. This has to come into play, if not in his motivations, then at least in the means in which he attains his goals. He doesn't have to be as brutal as Lady Stoneheart, but maybe a bit closer to Tywin Lannister when it comes to how he wields power and plans his moves. This would have made for a much more interesting character. And it's not as if the audience would have turned on Jon if he was no longer emulating what was something close to Ned's approach in his actions. People still sided with Arya when she was pursuing revenge. I think everyone would have easily accepted this change after what had happened to him. This could have also solved some of the latter season problems if Jon was given ulterior motives. For example, during the Battle of Winterfell, some of the decisions made there could have been Jon's attempt to expose Dany's forces to greater risk, thereby comparatively strengthening his own hand long term. Yeah, the Unsullied are our toughest fighting force, so let's just put them right here on the front line. That ought to work. Imagine, too, if him riding Rhaegal had been handled in a way that, through his own initiative after learning he's Rhaegar's son, Jon decides to go out and put it to the test by claiming Rhaegal. And this would all happen without Dany's knowledge. It's a similar surprise moment like on House of the Dragon, where Aemon just went out and snatched Vhagar for himself. This would then create immediate and realistic friction between Dany and Jon. Then we would start wondering what each person would do, not only at the Battle of Winterfell, but beyond. It could also be a catalyst for rash actions by Dany and Jon because of the distrust and tension between them and their factions. All of this was a huge missed opportunity rather than having Jon just trail along like a dutiful puppy who had no ambition.
I don't want it. I told you I don't want it. I never wanted a crown.
Unlike Lady Stoneheart, who went down a darker path that bordered on evil, Jon would just take on a harder edge, which would make for a better story where the characters would propel the plot, rather than the flip side of that coin, which we saw all too often in the latter seasons, where characters did inexplicable things to meet contrived plot points. It also would have raised speculation about a Dance of the Dragons collision between Jon and Dany. Since the road that Benioff and Weiss were on was one where they wanted to have Jon kill Dany, then it needed to have a plausible foundation to it. And the best way to get there is to have Jon changed by his resurrection, a man who is now cognizant of past betrayals, acting more devious and proactive to keep any of that from happening again. Rather than having Danny take this sudden turn into madness that didn't work for most of the audience, just take the same approach we saw in the early seasons of the show, having a person, in this case Jon, just being better and outwitting Danny in the game.
When you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die.
And while I do believe that in the books we'll see a changed Jon following his resurrection, what I've discussed here was just a show-focused approach on how Jon Snow, as portrayed in Game of Thrones, could have been a much better character in those latter seasons. If you enjoyed this one, make sure to hit the like button. If you're interested in more on House of the Dragon and A Song of Ice and Fire, listen to Caraxes and subscribe. I want to thank everyone for watching, and I'll see you soon.